Media Prima comes in complement to RTM's TV OK and Astro's Tutor TV. So these programs, these educational programs, will air for 17 hours a day. But the question is whether it will be enough to address the gaps that have been exacerbated by the pandemic and the digital divide. Our first guest on the show tonight is Professor of Educational Technology, Zaidatun Tasir. She's with the School of Education at the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at University Technology Malaysia. Good evening, Zaida. Thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. I'd like to begin our conversation with getting your initial thoughts on the recently launched Didik TV. What did you think?
Thank you, Melisa, for the question. Thank you also for Astro AWANI for inviting me. So when the launch of Didik TV has been announced by the Ministry of Education, as an educational technology, I'm so happy. I'm waiting for this because in other countries around the world, especially among the developing countries, they have been switched to educational TV when the pandemic COVID-19 struck the nations. And I believe this is a smart decision by Ministries of Education, where in the situations of pandemic COVID-19 where face-to-face class session could not executed, well, the best way to reach school students is through common media television. So although some of us think that TV is one of the low technological tools, but it will give a significant impact to viewer. The advantages of having TV as a medium of instruction is the popularity of the TV itself. I believe everyone loves to watch television. So I believe the decision has been planned properly by Ministry of Education, and we should congratulate the Ministry of Education teams on this strategic initiative.
Zaida, you know, while it's a smart move, some are saying that it's in fact come quite late. So Anwar Ahmad, who's an educationist with the University Kebangsaan Malaysia, UKM, says that, you know, this has come after a gap has already widened between, in terms of the digital divide, but also between the people in urban areas and students in rural Malaysia. What do you make of this lag between, you know, the start of the pandemic, what you notice internationally, and the fact that it's come almost a year after the pandemic started?
Okay, actually, nobody predicts that the pandemic COVID-19 will actually long, almost, I think, already almost 1 year that we face the pandemic COVID-19. And at first, I believe the Ministry of Education, actually, we actually to face teaching and learning with the use of online learning. But everybody knows that in Malaysia, in the areas of rural areas, not everybody has a strong internet access, and not every family has equipment for teaching and learning. So we can say it's quite late for us to go for Didik TV, but at least we actually launched it this year, early this year, that we actually, it shows that the Ministry of Education have to plan it properly, because like what happened in higher ed also, we thought that face-to-face teaching and learning can take place soon. But then what happens to the pandemics? We are actually in wave 3 right now, in pandemic COVID-19, and these actually have sent us a signal that we cannot wait it anymore. And yeah, it might be quite late if we compare to other countries, but it needs a proper planning before you launch this Didik TV. And I think the Ministry of Education now is ready, and they have a very good team and proper planning on when they want to launch this Didik TV.
So Zara, you're saying you're satisfied with the planning that went into the content and the educational content of Didik TV?
Okay, it's quite early for us to judge on the content of the Didik TV right now, because yesterday I just watched few of the sessions of Didik TV, but I can see some of the improvements on the Didik TV class sessions, where the use of technology and the use of, beside the teachers, there is one of the facilitators who try to interact with the teacher, and it's not actually easy to deliver instructions through television. It needs readiness, it needs skills among the teachers, and from time to time, the quality of preparations of the teaching and learning materials in Didik TV, I believe, it will improve from time to time, and more of us need to contribute and need to collaborate to support this initiative by the Ministry of Education.
Zaida, people of my generation, grew up with television and educational television shows. The one thing that we lacked in those years was, of course, the interactivity that comes from online platforms. There is a potential for interactivity. What do you make of this? The issue with regard to the attention span that children might have if there's no interactivity, the fact that they're at home, not in a classroom, and so the disciplining effects of being in a classroom and having your teacher in front of you means you can't play the fool and look elsewhere. What about that dimension of television and the educational experience for young people watching it?
Okay, no doubt, face-to-face learning is actually the best methods that we should have at school levels and at higher ed. But we are having a pandemic, COVID-19. We don't have any options. If we stick to online learning totally, we know that some of our students, especially school students at the rural area, they cannot get an access to the internet. So the best medium is what I call it educational TV. Of course, through educational TV, you only can cover two aspects of face-to-face instruction, which are the first one is modeling, where we can see the teachers in the television try to show the ways of understanding the concepts of instructions that we would like to deliver. The second one is the guided practice. The guided practice that with assumptions that the students actually interact individually at home towards the exercise that we give it in the TV. So there are three missing steps for direct instructions for educational TV, because educational TV involves a lot with direct instructions compared to the online learning. The three segments that's still missing in educational television is the independent practice, where you're going to check the understandings of students to the practice that you give it through the Didik TV, the monitoring and the feedback. I have a suggestion on this. My suggestion is that these three missing elements can be embedded, can be integrated with the school teachers at the school, where if the Didik TV team can work closely to the teachers at school, the number three, the independent practice, monitoring and feedback, we can actually assign the teachers at the school to come up with the activities to the students, follow on the instructions that deliver to Didik TV.
I wanted to ask you about, this idea that it's good that you have all these different aspects, and then you also need to monitor and perhaps have more than just, guided practice and guided instruction. How do we think about educational TV? Is Didik TV sufficient to be the primary platform for home-based learning, or are we thinking about Didik TV as complementary to online learning, that students need to have to continue online classes and Didik TV is extra? At the situation that we face right now, because we want to make sure that we reach every student, school students, whether where are they. So at this moment, I think the Didik TV will be a supplementary for online learning, because at the urban area where the student can get internet access, I think online learning, and of course some of the school they open it for face-to-face with SOP. That's the best way. So Didik TV can be actually a supplementary to online learning, but if you look at the rural area, it can be a primary platform for home-based learning, especially for those who do not have access to the internet, and for those who do not have a computers or other appropriate device for online learning and teaching. And to make sure the learning take place, of course, the material sets that will be delivered to the Didik TV must be actually encourage students in learning.
Zaida, we coming back to the issue of time, and I appreciate what you said earlier, but educationists have already noted that young people, especially from the B40 group, already disadvantaged, as it were, not disenchanted, but they are depressed by the idea of having lost time, being behind their peers and so on. Do you think that lost time, you as an educationist, is there a possibility of catching up? Is there a possibility of bringing those kids back into schools and getting them interested in school again?
Okay, yeah, this is actually not really a challenges that we face in Malaysia. This is a global challenge that have been argued a lot by educationists around the world. What makes us worried is the situations of a long-term learning loss among our school students. And what we need to do is that we need to work together, because it's almost 1 year. It's almost 1 year that we kind of did not have a face-to-face class session at the school. So in terms of the motivation of the students, whether they are actually feel motivated enough to go back to the schools when the pandemic COVID-19 actually done in Malaysia, we do not know. It makes us worried a lot. So this is where the collective action by all parties, not only by the Ministry of Education, but parents, societies, stakeholders, including us at the university, because you know what, we have kids. Our kids also have been affected by this pandemic COVID-19. So this is where a team works among us, that we need to sit together to solve this and to try to tackle this challenge. And one of the ways that flexibility by our government, also by the Ministry of Education, on the coverage of the curriculum itself, and how do we actually assess our students' performance instead of, yes, we have XPM to measure our student performance, but we kind of can find any ways or alternative ways to make sure that the student can catch up on the learnings that might be there actually lost because of the COVID-19. So I believe everybody has to contribute on this.
Yeah, I'm with you. I hear what you're saying, that we need a wider, more holistic solution, a more long-term planning solution when it comes to our education. But if I may, in the last couple of minutes that we have left, Zaida, come back to the conversation about Didik TV very specifically. What would you like to see change or improve with Didik TV, so that we make the use of the most of this, as you put it, low-tech but high-impact medium?
Okay, I was actually in 1970. I actually watched the educational TV that had been launched by RTM at that moment, and I used a lot of the education TV at that time. But what I am expecting with the transformation of Didik TV is that we should actually moving forward on delivering the instruction informally, not just like one ways of instructions where everybody has to, I think, act properly in front of camera, and that is what the use of the previous educational TV. So I'm expecting the Didik TV is actually the learning and teaching materials more interactive in terms of integrating the real-life application in the contents of Didik TV itself. And I actually welcome a lot for teachers, the one who going to deliver the session in Didik TV, to be informal as what they can as is what they actually did it in front of their students. And this is where to minimize the gaps between the teachers that deliver the instruction to the Didik TV with a student at home. So the informal learning process and styles of learning, I think that is my expectations for the Didik TV that have been launched by the Kementerian.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight, Professor Zaida. Appreciate your time. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This. We'll be back with more on this topic, so stay tuned.
Satu tahun yang pastinya hebat untuk...
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 7.45 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Gagalan Kerajaan Persekutuan tunai janji melaksanakan projek baik pulih sekolah daif turut diulas Menteri Muda Pendidikan dan Penyelidikan Teknologi Dr. Anwar Rapai.
COVID-19, 2 lagi kes disyaki atau PUI direkodkan di Sarawak.
So hopefully kita akan mendapat kedudukan yang lebih baik di masa-masa akan datang.
Udang geragau atau bubuk dalam bahasa tempatan terkenal sebagai bahan utama dalam pembuatan belacan atau cencaluk.
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta.
Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Astro Tutor TV's SMK Study Squad is currently the most watched academic show in the country. Ours Academy, which is an education-focused social enterprise, helped write the themes and lesson objectives for SMK Study Squad's episodes. So Alina Amir, who's the co-founder and director of Ours Academy, she joins us on the line now to share a little bit more about developing educational content for TV. Alina, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe you can begin by telling us a little bit more about Iris Academy's work with SMK Study Squad, specifically the considerations that have to be taken into account when designing educational content that will be delivered via TV.
Okay, so I'd say we were the content or education expert for all 5 episodes of the show. So what we had to do was we had to look at 6 different subjects, its learning objectives, and then group them together in a way that could create a great storyline or learning advantages for the characters on the show. So we weren't looking at subjects in silo, but we were looking at something that could be integrated together. So we came up with the learning themes, we reviewed the script that was written, we reviewed the animation that was made and made sure that the factual and educational content were accurate based on the national syllabus and aligned to our textbooks as well. So there were a few things that we took into consideration when planning for this. So number 1 was what would be meaningful and relevant to the students tuning in, and at the same time create an engaging storyline. So when we reviewed the script even, we wanted to ensure that there is a balance of entertainment, of jokes, with the actual teaching content that we were trying to deliver. So very important that we were thinking about themes that could tie different subjects together, but is also engaging enough for students to tune into the show.
Alina, and I mentioned this earlier as well, I'm coming from that generation which television was very important. I'm a product of Sesame Street, let me put it that way. And I love educational television. I think it made a real difference to my life. But I also grew up in a generation that wasn't as distracted, and maybe the production values that kids are now exposed to make it much more difficult, I think. But, to help me understand this, I mean, is it difficult to capture the attention of young people using television, which is quite a passive format, at least a medium rather, for the observer, for the viewer?
Definitely, with all of the options that are available, it's very important that the delivery is engaging and interactive enough for anybody to tune in. So I think it's really important that we do not replicate strategies that we use for face-to-face in-class teaching behind the screen teaching. And that is why we see a lot of the lecture-style one-way communication where the teachers are explaining concepts to you. So that should not be replicated on TV. yeah, I don't think it would work.
So, Alina, based on what you just said, what then has been your reaction or your initial thoughts watching the content that has come out on Didik TV in the past couple of days?
My immediate thoughts were, I feel like the teachers were not able to be themselves. That is not how a teacher interact or communicate with their students in the classroom. And so that should not have been the setting for that teacher. What we also need to remember is that an education channel cannot replace learning entirely, but it has a lot of potential to spark the love of learning when done right. So make it short and sweet rather than a really long lecture for students to sit in through. So we should not make completing the syllabus or translating the textbook into TV delivery, but make the objective of an education channel to be of sparking enough interest and curiosity for students to find out more after the show is over, rather than learning everything during the time of the show.
Okay, that's quite interesting.
We have
sorry, I just want to have a quick follow-up with Alina. Just based on what you said about not replicating face-to-face teaching, I'm wondering, based on your experience and your opinion, who'd be best to deliver educational TV lessons? I mean, there are those who argue that lessons should be delivered by TV presenters or actors who are familiar, presenting on TV. But there is another side of the argument that says, listen, those people might not understand the nuance of teaching. That's something that teachers get through years of experience. What are your thoughts on this?
Personally, I think edutainers should be delivering the lessons. And edutaining is a very specific skill set that does not necessarily come naturally to educators or entertainers. So this is where I think it's a brand new job, I guess, edutainers, where teachers should be consulted as the experts of the education content. They know the syllabus, they understand the learning objectives. The people in TV then should be the entertainment experts to ensure it fits for TV, where viewers are mostly watching passively and has many other options to watch. So just looking at our experience, ours has done so many educational shows, from financial literacy to coding and programming to SMK Study Squad. My team is great at coming up with themes for learning because they're trained teachers. But the production team, from the scriptwriter to the producers to the young talents, they were amazing at turning them into something that is entertaining. However, this could not have been done without one or the other. More of this collaboration needs to happen to make learning from TV much more effective.
So, Alina, one of the, I guess the challenges for television is that it's, you can't search it as you would Google or YouTube and find things that you want at the time that most suits you. You kind of are captive of the schedule that's put out. And so it takes us back to the 1970s almost with television of those days. How does that impact the way kids in real life might, take up Didik TV as a real way of getting through the school curriculum?
If the delivery is going to be a lecture-based show, I don't think it's going to be very effective for most kids to tune in. My thoughts are if we could make it more entertaining by just starting with, rather than calling each of the shows the subject as well as the year science down duo, for example, we could always repurpose the show to even call it as a problem statement of the day. So for example, instead of calling it science, we call this show "Why is the Sky Blue?" Immediately, regardless of your year, your age, what you're doing, you'll be immediately curious to want to know, like, why is the sky blue? You want to tune in, and when you tune in, you have a presenter that is unpacking the problem together with the viewer, rather than me just listening in an explanation that I could have read myself on the textbook.
Alina, can I ask you that sounds great, to make it, educational and entertaining, but many teachers, many parents even, and many government officials have a checklist that they need to get through, have a curriculum that they need to get through, and the year has already been challenging as such through online teaching. What do you think? Do you think that we've got the right mindset, we've got the right approach through Didik TV to make it fun and to use humor and to make it engaging? Or are we, still kind of focused on getting through that curriculum, getting through a checklist of things that we need to teach our children?
Given that Didik TV is still pretty new, I'm still very excited to see what else is in store. I would give credit to Didik TV's Road to Success SPM, that show. So despite it being very exam-centric, discussing mostly on formats and exam strategies, it does have the interaction element with students who calls in and also the interaction with the host itself. So involving the children in the teaching process immediately makes the show more engaging. So everything becomes more interesting when you can see yourself, relate things to yourself. So in terms of mindset, I think we need to sort of relax a little bit with the way we deliver. It needs to be a little bit in a more comfortable manner, call in students to discuss, to answer questions. So putting the students back at the center of learning rather than a one-way communication with the teacher.
Alina, one of the mantras of the last year has been build back better. And even a year ago, there was suggestions that this is the time to junk the dead wood of our education system, including the question of curriculum that doesn't speak to contemporary issues and so on and so forth. I mean, what would you like to see? I mean, if you agree with that, I mean, how do you think we can build back the education system better and include all these platforms, including Didik TV or television, not necessarily Didik TV specifically, but television, radio, online, YouTube, whatever it is? How can we build back better?
I feel like we're living in a learning opportunity with the pandemic, with whatever that is happening right now. This is an integration of multiple different fields and topics that we could have took an opportunity to teach our students on, from empathy to the science to the math to the history to the geography. We don't necessarily still have to drill a student to say you need to master a very specific subject. You don't. Look at what we're going through now and what can we learn now. So I feel like even with the way education is being delivered on TV or on radio or wherever it is, it's still very much focused on a very specific subject rather than a very meaningful or relevant way of making sense of what life is and what we're going through. And I think if we miss this, it's going to be, it's a missed opportunity, I guess.
Alina, thank you so much for sharing those great insights with us. You've given us a lot of things to think about. Thank you for your time joining us on the show tonight. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you tonight, just a quick reminder that that you can get the latest news and COVID-19 vaccination info on astroawani.com and the Astro Awani app. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching and good night.
Welcome to Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. The focus, of course, towards end of February is whether or not we're going to see a prolonged extension of the MCO past the 4th March extension that was already been announced previously. And how does this impact the SME, the small and medium-sized enterprises around the country? As we all know, and unemployment rate is at 4.8%. 770,000 people are currently out of jobs. And of course, these are all lagging data ending 31st December last year. We're looking at numbers that might be less optimistic for this quarter because of the MCO 2.0. But the true engine of growth will always be the SME. We're looking at an employer rate of anywhere between 60 to 95% of workers currently being employed by the SME sector. And how can the SME boost the growth of the nation, not just for themselves, not just for the corporations and the employers and employees within that space, but the nation itself? Here to discuss this with us is Datuk Michael Kang, President of the SME Association of Malaysia. Datuk Michael, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. Let's do a quick check into what the mood or the feel of the SME sector is right now. Are they optimistic about the situation? Are they feeling in trouble? What's the story like?
I think during this MCO2, I think most of the SME, although yes, they are facing consider a lot of pain if compared to MCO1. But at least MCO2, the government really opened up quite a numbers of business, a lot of business to operate. I think government should open up more and more business. Although we are extend currently the MCO2 already extend until 4th March. I think the way I look at it, you can see that the government are a lot more business to operate, so that we can be able to take care of the economy and then able to help the SME to overcome the problem which are faced, like especially cash flow. If SME can start their business, operate, strictly follow the SOP, I think SME should able to overcome the problem. So I think we hope that you can see that even tomorrow until 4th March, if it's still extended of MCO or CMCO, the way I look at it, more and more business allowed to operate. So we hope that the government can open up all the sectors so that SME can start rebuild the business and rebuild our economy and move towards better economy development for our country.
Why do you believe that opening up sectors is crucial right now? Because we understand that the government is trying to slowly open up and not all sectors are opening up because